we support science and recognize that this is not only about the future, but for the present. That's why we passed a historic piece of legislation known as Senate Bill 100, which increases our renewable portfolios from the state of California up to 60% and 100% of our electrical energy from renewable sources. Again, requiring 100% of our electrical energy coming from renewable sources. Now I'll tell you, since we've passed this piece of legislation, we have also been recipients of a number of different calls from other state legislators saying, what can we do to similarly emulate some of these different components? And by the way, this is not just an environmental issue. This was an issue that was supported by many in the business community, making sure that we can support business and climate change as a whole together. We will continue to do so, but leading the nation in that way. There was part of the major issues with respect to climate change. Let's move on to criminal justice reform. The state of California also passed a piece of legislation known as Senate Bill 10, which eliminated our cash bail system. We are the first state to do so. Bad. As some of you know,
so the question
there is
how many times
in our
will the
judicial
crime
system,
rate increase in
which
California?
is to say that
10%,
you get arrested,
twice, 3,
and go
4
through this
times.
process, and you can afford to pay, you
Right.
can be let out, known as posting bail. And if you do not have those type of resources, well,
you get more criminals on the street,
and you'll be imprisoned. So making sure that our justice system does not take into account that of socioeconomics and or that of what you were born in, we want to create parity and equality in our criminal justice system and ensuring that we have as much of a fair process as possible. And I'll say we continue
equality
to do so.
for criminals.
And this was the first state in the nation
Equality for
to
criminals.
eliminate
Amazing.
our cash bail system. And I'm hopeful that we will continue to look at additional reforms in our justice system to ensure that we have a judicial system that serves everybody.
How about they don't commit crime?
You know, one of the other pieces of legislation that I carried and that is currently sitting on the governor's desk was with respect to individuals. And we oftentimes talk about incarceration and individuals in the system and coming out of the system, recidivism. How do we set up individuals for that second chance and ensuring that we give them that opportunity? We also know about this issue about checking the box or that you have a felony. It becomes that much harder to find a job.
That's the consequence.
I think that we believe in second chances.
Of committing crime.
And if the individual has gone through a system and paid their due diligence, their time, that we have an opportunity to provide them a second chance at life. This piece of legislation that is currently sitting on the governor's desk is Assembly Bill 2138 that prohibits the denial of licensure for non-violent convictions so that different individuals wishing to get licensed have an opportunity and that continued consideration.
Can you explain what those 9 non-violent crimes are?
One by one. Again, non-serious conviction.
Not serious. The drug sales isn't serious.
Society.
DUIs aren't serious.
Next to technology and consumer protection. The state of California, we've seen not only with respect to the environment, but with respect to consumer protection and people.
I can video you all I want.
With net neutrality
So stop
in the
staring
Trump
if you don't like
administration, we said we do not believe in such things. We want to ensure that we have net neutrality, which protects consumers. So the state of California, we have passed a piece of legislation that is currently on the governor's desk to ensure that consumers are not subjugated to such corporate tax, ensuring that you can stream and have an opportunity and that corporate interests do not get in the way of our fundamental access to information.
How about keeping the government out of our lives?
Just very quickly, too, we have a number of different new technologies and new things that we're trying to tackle that are very problematic for our democracy. What happens when you have the app economy that is innovating so quickly, and yet we don't have the regulations in place? That is why we passed a piece of legislation that will require safety recalls on personal ride-sharing programs. There are many companies now in which you can share your vehicles should you be in this audience, for example, now, you can post on your app and say, I want to rent out my vehicle for a day or an hour, and individuals can do so. We want to ensure that we have those types of safety protections, and therefore have passed a bill to ensure that the same type of safety recalls on these vehicles should they be let out. How about with respect to cannabis? This piece of the issue of cannabis, as in the infinite wisdom of the electorate, just as a recollection, was passed by the voters. Voters passed a legalization of cannabis. It is our obligation, though, to make some necessary changes with respect to consumer protection. That's why I proposed a piece of legislation that is currently sitting on the governor's desk.
Solution to everything.
15 days or more to sign these pieces of legislation. But it would prohibit dispensaries from sharing your data, if you are a consumer of cannabis, from third-party vendors without your consent. And we want to make sure that that does not go out without consent. Moving on to elections and the integrity of our elections. A quick story. I'm sure many of you can share this similar type of experience, but I was at Trader Joe's in a baseball cap and buying some groceries, and there was a petition gatherer outside that Trader Joe's. I actually tried to not make eye contact, but so no such luck. And the individual said, "Do you want to stop the tyranny of the Sacramento politicians?"
Hell yeah.
Yes. I said, "Actually, I'm all ears now. Please do tell."
I'm a tyrant.
Yeah.
As the individual talked to me about getting my signature, I proceeded to ask questions. The conversation immediately ceased, and the individual, the petition gatherer, went to the other person. And part of the reason is because sometimes these petition gatherers are paid up to $10 a signature. And we know that that can be problematic because if they're incentivized per signature, they do not have to have a robust conversation and dialogue with you. And unfortunately,
sounds like the whole Democrat
so much
Party.
of our democracy has been abused. In fact, this initiative process was never meant to be used by the special moneyed interests, but rather by citizens' engagement, a grassroots effort. Unfortunately, it's been 30 plus years since it's just solely been a citizens-led effort.
Lobbyist
As
sponsor.
I mentioned to you before,
George Soros.
2 years ago, we had 17 propositions. If you lived in the city and county of San Francisco, you had 17 statewide propositions or 25 local propositions, in addition to your local offices. This year, we have 11 on the ballot that I know many of you are very well informed on, and the voter information guide is oftentimes very complicated, to which I would suggest to you it is even difficult for me to understand and to be able to read. Therein lies the opportunity to make sure that we want to maintain the integrity of our electoral process and get rid of paid signature gatherers so that we do not have a system in place in which these special interests continue to abuse the system.
Then submit our voter rolls so we can clean them up.
These areas. So these are the things that we are focused on.
Right.
I'll also tell you that there was a very grassroots process with respect to our laws and how petitions work. Last year, during our open house, Council member Paul Resnikoff at the time said, "Does it really work? We had something called a bill trimming process in which you could put a bill idea on a tree." And he said, "Is that real? Would you really consider a bill idea that I have?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "What is the bill? What is the concept?" Well, here in the city of Campbell, passed an ordinance that says we do not allow dispensaries, local control. We will not allow cannabis dispensaries in the city of Campbell. Unfortunately, there were individuals within the cannabis industry who said, well, we want to go a different direction. We want to collect signatures in the city of Campbell and place something on the ballot for us to allow for cannabis to be distributed in the city of Campbell. As a result, the city of Campbell and public taxpayer dollars spend close to $1 million to put this standalone special election on the ballot. This initiative failed.
Those resistors.
With no foreseeable benefit to public good. And I'll tell you, when I served on the city council, I remember arguing with fellow council members over $5,000 on pavements and other areas. But $1 million, that's a really difficult pill to swallow, particularly for a small community. So I share that with you so that we can be a much more informed electorate. And I have to sometimes ask myself, there is this initiative that actually qualified to split California into 3 territories. And I said, gosh, do fellow Californians really believe that's what they're signing? Said, hi, would you please, getting your broccoli, would you please sign the initiative to split California into 3
Kind of like
territories?
AB2943.
So again, with the process to use us as accountability in our democratic process, that is that of our state legislative process.
Right.
Moving on to something that's near and dear to my heart with respect to LGBT rights.
Where's those signs, guys? Get your signs up.
In 2012, the state of California passed a piece of legislation that would ban conversion therapy for minors 18 and under. This notion of conversion therapy.
It's reparative therapy, not conversion therapy.
The notion of conversion therapy is such that
reparative.
Your sexual orientation can be changed. This has been debunked by the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, American Family Therapists, a number of widely respected medical groups.
And 9-year-olds are committing suicide because you're pushing it on them.
Since 2012,
Right.
15 other states have also passed.
Didn't have suicide with 9-year-olds before these people came around.
As a result, this year, we've introduced legislation to qualify it as a fraudulent practice. Under the Consumer Legal Remedies Act, just call it what it is.
Fraud. They're freaking nuts. They're nuts. These people support kids' suicide.
It is also taken with great respect that I am aware that there are some other communities who may still believe in that. But under this piece of legislation, you can still practice conversion therapy so long as there's not a financial transaction.
Reparative therapy.
So that's why we want to make it very narrow in scope to ensure that we have the protections in place, but allow for our democracy to still occur. That piece of legislation
He's saying it wrong.
Was received bipartisan support, and
yes,
currently,
like we poke and prod people or something.
In the very near future. So keep apprised of that. Is something that I think is near and dear to my heart, and ensuring that we stand as a community that is inclusive and celebrates all people.
So we get more children's suicide. Yay for suicide! Yay for suicide! Yay for suicide! 9-year-olds did not commit suicide back in the day.
How about this?
I'll get you
this other issue. Moving on to public safety, the opioid crisis. Did you know that there were enough opioids prescribed for every man, woman, and child around the clock for every Californian for an entire month in the state of California?
And it says lobbyists support your campaign.
Something that we want to address, and it's a challenging issue to tackle. But there are some simple things that we can do. The state of California, previously, until legislation was signed that we passed, interstate database sharing.
And stop loading our kids with hormones. That would be a good one.
Individuals could go to Nevada, get their prescriptions, and then cross the borders to California and get their prescriptions filled without the prescriber knowing that this prescription has already been given to this individual. So using basic technology, the things that we already have, just on the small things that we can do are very important. We also had a bill that was signed that put serial numbers on prescription pads. On the prescribers, oftentimes these prescription pads would get into the black market, and we were not able to track them. With these serial numbers, now law enforcement can actually track down the serial pads and find out where the source is coming from to prevent further victimization and abuse.
Thank Trump for that.
It is not just a stigma and an issue that is focused in rural California.
It's true.
But in places all over. And
yes.
I'm proud that we can continue to tackle this issue while we have a lot more work to do. And I very much would welcome your input to ensuring that we can continually protect individuals in the state.
Work with our president to help the situation. Woo! I support this message. Work with Trump. Woohoo! End opioid addiction. Work with our president.
Just a few more issues, and then we'll get into our community events. I also have a bill on the governor's desk, which is Assembly Bill 1968. There was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jorge Wong, who was former president of the California Psychological Association. He currently practices as a psychologist at Asian Americans for Community Involvement. There was a Campbell resident who was placed on a 5150 hold twice in 1 year, which refers to that of an individual who has been deemed not to be stable. This piece of legislation says that if you are placed on a 5150 hold twice in 1 year, you're prohibited from life from owning a firearm because of fear of harm to yourself and harm to the community. You can still petition a judge. You can still petition a judge to allow for the opportunity to see if this individual should be able to possess a firearm. But I told you that story about Dr. Jorge Wong, in which he testified in Sacramento and said there was an individual who shot herself because she was placed twice in 1 year on 2 5150 holds. So not only is just for the community, but for the individuals themselves. And again, in California, we want to make sure that we have a safe space for everyone.
How are you going to have? There's no such thing as a safe space.
Finally, let's talk infrastructure. I know a very sexy topic for all of us, but nonetheless a very important one. And I know all of you care deeply, equally about housing, the issues of housing, and the issues of our roads. Look, nothing is going to be solved overnight. And given how we do planning with respect to local jurisdictions, these times take years and oftentimes decades. But with the state of California, we have focused on a number of different initiatives which allows and empowers local jurisdictions to continue to build. And that's why, for example, in the city of Cupertino, the dilapidated Valco project will be built with hundreds upon hundreds of affordable housing units to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place in accordance with jobs. Now just think about that for one moment with respect to the city of Cupertino. The most valuable company in the world, that of Apple Computer, has built its spaceship, and we are proud of that. At the same time, we need to make sure that we have a balanced approach to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place. That is where we need to.
That's why you need our president.
The things that we care about, and making sure that we have the roadways, and by the way, that the corporations are paying their fair share for the public benefit that is being used by the profits that are being generated. So, for what I consider the fun part, if I can kindly call up the mayor for the city of Campbell, Mayor Paul Resnikoff, our Los Gatos former mayor and current council member, Mariko Sayog, San Jose council member Deb Davis, Monte Sereno Mayor Burton Craig, Saratoga Mayor Marilyn Bernal. And we have a staff member also for the city of Cupertino. So this year, tax revenues in the state of California had not been touched or changed within 20 years. But this year, with bipartisan support, both Republicans and Democrats,
we don't have any
we're able to
Republicans.
pass a bill with respect to transportation funding, a much sorely needed revenue stream that, frankly, is difficult for the political establishment to support. But as a direct result, these resources will not be used for any other issue other than transportation, and goes directly to our local
that's
communities.
A lie.
And so
that's a lie. You guys believe this? Really? You believe that? Come on.
Cindy, look at this platform so far.
They believe everything.
Campbell,
Oh my God.
Each year, the state of California,
That's how
$250,000 for our city of
Seriously.
Campbell.
Read a book. James.
And from the city of San Jose, we have Councilmember Sergio Jimenez and Councilmember Deb Davis. a whopping $6 million to the state every single year.
These sheep
And I
in
know
here
these will
freaking
be
believe
good stewards of our public
everything.
trust because this is all of our public taxpayer dollars.
It's funny.
To the town of Los Gatos, $220,000.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and to the city of Monte Sereno, a whopping $16,000.
That is so funny. These people are like, that.
They count how much the residents make in one day. To the city of Cupertino, $271,000.
Yeah, they do.
And to our lovely city of Saratoga, $178,000. Again, our public officials, your public servants will continue to be here. These are our representatives, and I know that they are very accessible. So should you have any interest in understanding where these dedicated resources are going to this specific project in their local communities, I know that they'll be delighted to share with you. So again, to our public officials, thank you very much. Finally now, before the exciting part of our community awards, there are some upcoming events that I wanted to share with you because this forum does not necessarily allow for a one-on-one dialogue. So I very much welcome an opportunity to talk to you. So the first event, we have Boba and Bills. If you like tea and boba, we can talk and share some tea and have an opportunity to talk to you there about any bill ideas or any other things and challenges that you might have.